Okie dokie. 5 on the nose. All right, module number 12 out of 16. Well, actually 15 if you don't count the last week as final. But yeah, we're getting towards the end. As always, got a picture of this super secure site. This module will cover access control, and just like other areas of security, it has its own terminologies. Hooray, more terms to learn. Identification, authentication, authorization, access, and accounting. The big idea really is how do we keep track of who has access to what, when, where, how, and what? Because it is so easy to make a user account and call it user and give it to everyone and everyone log in. And then when something bad happens, we lose track of who did it because everybody can just point fingers at each other and no one gets the blame and the disaster still happens. So we have to identify what credentials are being used. We have to figure out how are they going to authenticate, who's going to authorize who to get in, what kind of access will they have, and through all that process, how are we going to have a record of said user who got access to this file or to this folder, to this server, and they were authenticated by this system. Access control is definitely not a set and forget. It is a role managed system, which means you don't just, it's not just one person who's going to control and have all the keys to the kingdom. You're going to have a number of people. For example, a privacy officer who is in charge of overseeing data privacy compliance, especially if your business deals with things like health and credit cards and all that kind of stuff. You have the custodian or the steward, the individual who has day-to-day actions assigned by the owner. The owner is the person who is chiefly responsible for the information. And then we have the end user who will access the information to do their job. So the custodian and the end user are not the same people. They do different jobs. Of course, ideally, you want to have a separate person for each of these roles. That is not always possible. Sometimes the owner is the custodian and the privacy officer and could also be the end user. The data that we're talking about can be anything from a file to a folder, to a shared folder, to a drive, to a complete server, to an infrastructure. This gets crazy fast because setting permissions is something that system and network admins hate to do because it's a very tedious process. There's a lot of things that you have to set, and if a certain permission isn't set right, it might not let a user do their job, and it can get crazy. But you have to do it in order to protect your data. So here's an example of all those roles in action. You have the owner who created the object. In this case, it's a salary.excel file. You have the end user who can log into a computer. And here is their identification, the authentication, the authorization, and the access. You have the privacy officer who decides what user can access, and the custodian who reviews. There are different ways to set access control. It can be mandatory, where the end user cannot set the control, it is the most restrictive. So you know if you go down this road, you're going to have the most complaints. There's the discretionary access control, where the subject has total control over the object. So it's the least restrictive, the polar opposite of mandatory. The role-based, if you have Active Directory and you have a number of roles, you can set it up through that, for example. There's the rule-based, based on a certain set of rules that this user can access it only if X, Y, and Z is met. And the attribute-based, using policies, which is the most flexible out of all of these. Security Plus will test you on these access controls. Being able to explain them to anyone in layman's terms will help you on the test, because they will ask you, they'll set you up and say which access control will work best to secure the data. And you'll need to understand these. And like I said, if you can explain these in layman's terms, you're good. You'll be able to answer the question without fail. Speaking of accounts, we have the onboarding, which is always it should be a formal process set in policy to protect the company. For example, when a new employee is hired, there should be several steps to make the new employee not only feel part of the team, but also be as productive as possible. In our focus, the new hires should have their computer provisioned, their email boxes set up, user accounts, and proper permissions set for them to do their job. That's the easy part. The hard part is offboarding. This should also be a formal process, and it is the harder of the two. The necessary steps should include backing up all employee files from their machine and any server, archiving their email, forwarding email to a manager or a coworker, disabling the account immediately to prevent the user from doing things like getting even and causing harm to the company if they're leaving not on the best of terms. It is never recommended to delete an account, but to disable an account just in case the user encrypted files. Then you'll need to be able to access that account to decrypt them later, along with being able to go back to any archives of that user. You should not delete accounts. You should always disable accounts, just in case you need to go back for any reason. So I say this is the harder because it may not always, an employee may not always leave on the best of terms. They may try to sabotage. They may try to do one last punch before they go, or it may be on great terms, and then this is not a problem. But you always prepare for the worst, because you don't always know when someone's going to leave. You always have to be ready, and you should have a process in place so that person doesn't just cause mayhem to you as they leave. Another section with accounts and account security is using geofencing. And we've talked about this before, that yes, you can make a geofence to restrict accounts from logging in outside of a designated area, but that also means that the user has to give up part of their privacy. They have to say, whether through an app or through any means, they have to give their exact location to you in order for the system to let you in. So that can always be a dicey situation. Standard naming conventions will help you prevent confusion. These rules should be part of a written policy for easy implementation, like using first letter, last name, or using some form of common standard that'll help you across the board for issues with users. Another restriction that you can implement is time of day. You know when the person is supposed to be there, is supposed to work, so you can set when they are blocked from logging in. This will prevent, if the account for whatever reason gets compromised, from being utilized to launch an attack into your system, because they'll be locked out. This can be used also as a flag, as like a canary, that as soon as you notice, this account tried to log in at 3 a.m., but we know this person doesn't work at 3 a.m., we can take steps to automatically change the password or just block the account until we can resolve the issue, knowing that we have a problem now. The least privilege principle is an important concept that, when followed correctly, can prevent attackers from getting far should a breach occur. By giving accounts, and that's user and system accounts, only enough rights to do their job, you can minimize the damage a compromised account can do. That is not to say this is an end-all be-all, but this is definitely something you can implement. It will also cause great annoyance to users who are accustomed to being administrators on their system or having the capability to do whatever they need at their leisure. Being taken away, that can rub some people the wrong way. So if you want to implement least privilege principle, you want to do it tactfully, you want to educate users, you want to show them and bring them on your side to understand why you're taking away their rights to do what they want on their systems, for the security of all. That can be a long, drawn out conversation that will be necessary. Now, some best practices for access control can be things like separation of duties, dividing responsibilities so that the system is not vulnerable to the actions performed by a single person. So instead of having one person who is the full administrator on the network and on the systems, you divide that in half. You have a person who is in charge of the network and the network only. You have another person who is in charge of the systems. You could have another person who's in charge of the domain, another person who's in charge of backup. You separate the roles so that no one person is too powerful and can cause mayhem to you. You always have to be ready in case someone causes mayhem. That is always something that you, as a security person, always have to factor. Another best practice can be job rotation, periodically moving people from one job responsibility to another to limit the amount of time a user can manipulate a security configuration. It can reduce burnout and uncover vulnerabilities. I had a partner who once told the story that they found somebody who was funneling money out of an account, and the only way they found that out was when they rotated that person. A certain account was not extracting as much money as it used to. And when they dug further, they found, it was this person who had access to the account and who was charging extra and taking that off. And the only way they found that was by rotating people around. An interesting best practice is a mandatory vacation. forcing someone to take a vacation and during that time reset all the passwords, lock that person out because they're on vacation, right? They shouldn't be working. That's the whole definition of vacation. So while they are in vacation, you prevent them from accessing any of their work systems so you can perform any audits that are necessary while they're gone. Again, this can help to uncover any fraudulent activity because if not, they're not there to do it and there's a anomaly, that's the time to find it. Another good best practice that keeps failing to be implemented is the clean desk policy, ensuring confidential or sensitive materials are removed from a user's workspace, preventing risk of theft from prying visitors' eyes and increasing employee awareness to protect sensitive information. This picture, if you recall, was taken when Hawaii issued a nuclear threat, and everybody freaked out. And then they went to report, and oh no, nothing bad was happening. It was a mistake, and they took a picture of this, and well, they were able to see and zoom in to see what the password was to the system that they were using. This went out on national news and became a whole big thing. If this place implemented clean desk policy, that little sticky note would not be on that screen, and that whole incident would not have occurred. So implementing these access control lists, the set of permissions attached to an object, the oldest and most basic form of access control. So as such, it has limitations as it's not really efficient. Every object has to be checked individually, which makes it difficult to manage in an enterprise with many users. You can use things like group policy as a solution to handle over a local system or an entire domain. Now, some identity and access services are things like Radius, IEEE 802.1x. In this case, being implemented for this laptop to log on to this network. The client goes through this crazy step, this 6-step process of sending in the user and password, getting an authentication request, getting that compared with a database, the acknowledgement sent to the access point, the record being kept, and the approval arriving to the laptop so that the device can join the network. Used by universities and government agencies, it's a ticket granting system for, oh, sorry, this is Kerberos. This is Kerberos, a ticket granting system. It is much more crazier than Radius. These tickets contain linking information to a user and must be presented to a service which verifies it before access is granted. The entire process is internal and transparent for a user. So when a user wants to connect, they have to get a ticket. That ticket has to be taken to another system to get the first part, get it authenticated, that request returns, that request that gets verified, and the response comes back. Any roles are given, and then that is sent back to the client. It's Kerberos because it requires three heads, like the dog. Ha 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 ha. Tech people are not the greatest at naming stuff. But this whole process can be used to verify a user. Another one that's similar to Radius, the Terminal Access Control System Plus, made by Cisco. It seems to me this seems more nuttier than Kerberos, but it's a Cisco thing. There is also the Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, or LDAP, the database stored on the network that contains information about users and devices. The ISO standard for this is X.500. It is by default not secure. If you want to use the secure version, it's LDAP-S. Haha, haha. And lastly, there's also the Security Assertion Markup Language, or SAML. It's an XML standard that allows secure web domains to exchange user authentication and authorization data, storing credentials in a single identity provider instead of a web service provider server. SAML can work with HTTP, SMTP, and FTP. So the big things for the test would be the types of access controls, these types of protocols that we just covered, and some best practices. Any questions? Okay. Let's stop this recording. Take these files and move them out of the way. Make a new share. And hit record again. So this week, I don't have a Try Hackney box for you to hit or other things to do. Instead, what I have for you is a prep for the Security Plus exam. I've given you the link to a site where you can test yourself. They have a lot of questions that you can use. To me, I have found this site to be as close to the real thing as possible, better than other flashcards and other sites, and it's free. So I haven't had any problems. I was able to get through a couple of certs using this site as a practice after going through the content and feeling more confident to do it. I took those questions and I feel like it helped me in passing the tests. So go through them. Note which ones you're getting wrong and focus on knowing the concept, not so much the question, because the test will check if you have the knowledge to understand what they're asking, like what acronyms are showing up, the context of the questions. Use this site to gauge your stance in your journey to getting the certification exam. I honestly strongly suggest that before the class is over, you sign up, get your voucher, sign up, and take that test. It is a good piece of advice to take it between the last week of the course and no later than 3 weeks after. That way the information is still fresh in your mind. Because as soon as the class is over, you start to forget, the holidays are coming up. It's going to be very easy to slow yourself down and get out of practice with this content. And remember that the 501 is going to be retired and will be switched over to the 601. So you really want to take the 501 before it expires using this content. Because in fall 2021, I'm going to rewrite this course for the 601. So take advantage while the 501 is still around and this content is available to study, to practice, and go and take the test. As you can see, you don't have to submit anything to me this week because this is your own practice to see where you stand. Of course, when you get stuck on something and you have questions to ask away in the Discord because that's what it's there for. Also know that you should be preparing your questions for the CTF. It is almost ready. So that link will be given in Discord for you to sign in and start inputting your questions. So you should be working on that in the meantime. But again, this week, you don't have anything to turn in. It's just really a practice for you ahead of going and getting your certification, along with working on the final project. Any questions? Okay, I see no questions, so I will end the stream.